My mother says that I sang before I could talk, which is not uncommon because I think the musical part of the brain is a different part of the brain than the verbal part of the brain. So I would sing melodies. So I knew from the time I was a child that I really loved music, and I sang in children's choirs and musicals and all of that. But it wasn't until college when I discovered jazz and I was exposed to jazz for the first time that I really knew that it was something I wanted to pursue. I was studying Russian language and literature, and I heard Sarah Vaughan for the first time, and I heard Ella Fitzgerald for the first time. That sounds terrible to hear those people for the first time when you're, 19 years old, but that's how it was for me. But once I heard them, I said, oh, this is really a passion. This is something that I really want to be a part of. I think the interesting thing for me about jazz at the beginning was that there was a tension and there was a depth that I didn't hear in in a lot of the pop music that I listened to. And I realized that the pop music that I really loved had a lot of jazz elements in it. Earth, Wind and Fire or Steely Dan or Stevie Wonder were the kind of things that I really gravitated to. And I only realized later all the jazz elements that were parts of that music. I write a little bit of music. In fact, more accurately, I've written some lyrics to other people's melodies and music. The most challenging moment in my career as a jazz storyteller, well, I would say the most challenging and the most wonderful was probably when Clint Eastwood approached me and my band about doing music for Sully. That was the biggest challenge because we had a very, very short time period to create the music, and I had a very short time period to write lyrics to two of the songs that we were proposing for the film. And I had never really done anything at that level before. I mean, it's a very unusual opportunity. So I'd say that was the biggest challenge. Well, in one sense, the band was really, really prepared for this kind of work because we collaborate and we've been collaborating in what we do for, by that point, over 20 years. And we had done one independent film as a band and created music for that film. And we also were practiced in the art of detachment, I would say. We understood the film business and we knew that a lot of the music that we would offer would not end up in the finished film. But Clint was so wonderful and a lot of our music did end up in the finished film. So on the one hand, I knew that we were really capable of doing it. But in terms of writing the lyrics and writing the lyrics quickly, that was a new thing for me. And I said to myself, this opportunity doesn't come around every day, and you're going to do this, even though at the beginning, Clint didn't ask me to write a lyric for something. But I said, okay, I'm going to do this. I'm going to challenge myself, and I'm going to take this opportunity. I definitely had fear, but I just knew that it was time for me to try to get out of my comfort zone. I met my band in 92, 93 when I moved to LA. And they were playing with a great trumpet player comedian named Jack Sheldon. And he had a big band, and they were the rhythm section in that big band. So I met them when I first moved to LA, and I said, wow, I think LA could be a great place for me to create relationships with, at that time, young jazz musicians like myself. I was spending a lot of my time in New York, and I was living in Boston at the time, and I had decided basically to move to New York. But when I visited LA and I met my bandmates, I said, oh, there's a whole scene in LA that could be really, really wonderful. And it really has been. We all had similar passions to do jazz, but also to expand it and do things that were different than what everybody had done already. All jazz is basically a variation on something that might be a little bit familiar. I mean, it's one way to describe it. People also write their original music, and it can be completely revolutionary and unlike anything else. However, I think the art of jazz and the art of creating something different is about creating elements that maybe haven't been together before. All of the members of my band play a lot of different styles. They all play in orchestras and funk bands and rock bands and all of these kinds of things. And therefore, they were really happy to bring all those elements into our arrangements. And so we all collaboratively arranged these songs. And we all put in the influences and the music that was shaping us. And I am not, I guess, what people would call the jazz police. We say in the jazz world, like, this is jazz and this is not jazz. I think that's a silly argument, because all of our jazz heroes took the form into a new place and brought in elements that previous to that were not considered jazz. So I think that argument is not helpful. I think right now we're seeing some wonderful things in jazz. We're seeing elements of music from all over the world. The United States has been so dominant in musical culture for so long. And the development of jazz, which, essentially came from the African American church and came from the coming together of the Broadway songwriters and those songs, and then lots of elements of African American music and that history. Now, most jazz musicians are looking all over the world. They're looking in India. They're adding elements from Africa. They're adding elements from European folk music. It could be anything. And so I think the history of jazz has been about unity and coming together of different kinds of elements in an improvisational way. And so jazz is a very natural art form to embrace the entire world. Well, already in jazz, there is a strong element and a strong love for Brazilian music. And so I love Brazilian music, and I'm actually in consultation right now about possibly doing a Brazilian album and looking more deeply into that music. And that music, it's very interesting that Brazilian music and jazz have had a little love affair for all these years, because they're similar musics. I mean, the history of Brazil is a history of coming together of different cultures and different races in Brazil. And that's what formed that music in a similar way to the way jazz was developed in the United States. So I'm very moved and touched by the music of Brazil, as most jazz musicians are. But I also love a lot of the music of the Middle East. There is a tradition of hollow reed flute playing that is really beautiful, and the sound just blows my mind, and I think a lot about that when I sing myself. My band's been together over 25 years now, and I would say that the biggest factor, and it's kind of unheard of. There just isn't anybody else that I can think of that has the same members for this period of time and works collaboratively as partners. So one thing is that we're incorporated. We are financial partners. My father used to say, people will give you anything except some of their money. So, find a band that really it functions this way. So that's one thing, to really invest everybody in the music and to not worry about always having to make a ton more money than the members of your band. That's kind of ridiculous. But in terms of the development of the music, we use principles partly from the Baha'i Faith. I'm a member of the Baha'i Faith, and there's an idea that to solve problems, there are certain principles that you have to follow. And one principle is to strive for excellence in yourself And I think everybody in my band really does that. I so admire all of them as musicians. Offer your idea, but then be detached. So once an idea is offered in a Baha'i consultation, it's no longer Joy's idea or Tierney's idea, it's an idea that everybody's talking about. And so people work on the skill of not being attached to a creative idea. And over 25 years and 14 albums and films and all the rest of it, I've had so many experiences, and I think everyone in the band has, where I've offered an idea that I was really attached to, but I knew I had to detach from it. And what happened with that idea, once it was in the hands of the band, was so much better than what I would have been attached to at the beginning. And so when you have that experience over and over again, you want to go through that process again. You want to have that experience. And so I think that that's really the biggest thing that's kept the band together. And when we go on stage, the other element of the consultative process is once you decide to go with an idea, and when we're doing music together, we'll decide to do some concerts and test out these arrangements, put them on stage, because they live in live performance in a different way than they do when you're just practicing. And everybody has to invest fully. Everybody has to imagine that the decision that was made was the best decision for now. And if it turns out that it doesn't fly, or some element needs to be improved, the interesting thing is that after all these years, it's not just one person that will make that decision. We'll often be unanimous and say, okay, this part of that arrangement just isn't as good as it could be. Let's fix that. Everybody has a common feeling. It's not, I really have to do this. And sometimes when someone has a very strong feeling about something, we love and respect each other enough to say, okay, there's a reason he has a strong feeling, And so it's a combination of detachment and respect when someone really feels strongly. Well, to be honest, the first time that I was nominated was 2005, and the biggest part of it for me was to have a credit that I could tell my father, who was an attorney in Milwaukee, that he could tell his friends, that would mean something to people outside of the music business. So that was one thing. After all these years, I just feel I never am anything less than amazed and gratified to be nominated. It just means that your peers think that what you're doing is worth recognizing. And in this world with so much stuff going on, that's a very precious thing. There's no doubt about it. I'm sad about losing him, because it was right before we did Sully and did all the work with Clint Eastwood, who has become a good friend. And my father would have so enjoyed that, seeing the film and meeting Clint and all the rest of it. So, but I'm sure he's enjoying it from wherever he is. Well, let's see. Well, I just got married, and my husband lives in Paris, and so I'll be going back and forth from LA to Paris more frequently, for sure. So I'm excited about that. He's a wonderful guitarist, and we have projects that we'll do together. So that's, of course, exciting and lovely. I'm excited about exploring the idea of doing a Brazilian project, and I'm in consultation about that now. I'm also doing a project with the great lyricist Alan Bergman, Alan and Marilyn Bergman, who wrote The Way We Were and wrote a lot of the songs on the latest album. And we're working on a lullaby, a jazz lullaby project for children and for adults too, to record songs that they've written that could be considered lullabies. And there's lots of really, really great ones. So there's a lot of wonderful possibilities. I think the best advice that I can give is that if you enjoy the process of preparing the work, then you're in good shape. If what you really enjoy is performing the work or getting paid a lot of money for the work, then it's not the job for you. If it's something that you enjoy doing because you're in love with the music, then that will serve you well. I don't think, no matter what, that's never going to change. Well, taking care of yourself is a really good question. I've definitely figured out over all these years is that when I'm on the road especially, I have to sleep. I have to sleep. I can't do 2 shows in 2 nights and get up at 3 o'clock in the morning and not have any sleep. It's just too much. And usually my voice takes a hit if I do that, and I often get sick. So I would say rest is very, very important. I pray every day and meditate every day. That's very important. I exercise as many days as I possibly can. It's very important. Aerobic exercise, walking, jogging a little bit, doing something that works up a sweat. That's very important to me for my psychological well-being, I think. And I think not forgetting to turn to the music that you fell in love with. You know, it's very hard when you're doing a lot of PR, when you finished a project and you're just talking and talking and talking about it, to forget what brought you here in the first place. And I think you have to keep nourishing yourself with that. Now, I think that that's really important. And I think in the current climate where everything is about self-promotion and social media and all of this stuff, you have to limit it. You have to make sure that you're not spending 3/4 of your time doing that and a tiny little percentage of your time really being inside the music that you love. Well, the band will be at Catalina Bar and Grill on Sunset, the jazz club, a wonderful jazz club, and we'll be celebrating this Grammy nomination and the music on January 3rd and January 4th. We'll have a couple of beautiful guests, including my husband, who played on a few songs on the record, and Alan Bergman, who sings one duet with me. So that'll be really fun. Well, let's see. I right now I'm on Instagram, Tierney Sutton Music, Tierney Sutton Music, Tierney Sutton Music, because I got locked out of my Tierney Sutton. It's a long story, and Instagram is working on it right now, actually. And let's see, at Tierney Sutton Twitter, just Tierney Sutton, and TierneySutton.com. Probably the best thing is the website, which has everything.